This early morning, let's find inner peace in times of chaos with a guided journey. What if turmoil was not an indictment? What if who we are was not determined by what we perceive, but rather by what we do with what we perceive? It's been said that there are many different meanings of yin and yang. And the philosophical meanings of yin and yang are different than the medical meanings of yin and yang. The philosophical meanings of yin and yang have many synonyms, including a patriarchy and matriarchy, or Devadatta nature and Buddha nature, or Darth Sidious versus Qui-Gon Jinn. A dichotomy between the two can be rigidity versus flexibility, fear versus love, controlling tendencies versus being laid back, elitist versus being egalitarian, cryptic versus being lucid, competitive being versus being cooperative. Those who are elitist, those who are controlling, don't love you. They love themselves, and they view you either as an enemy or a tool. And they are happy to metaphorically crush what is left of your self-esteem under the heel of their boot if that somehow serves them, even if momentarily it seems to increase their sense of personal worth. These are the people who, in their ignorance and in their cruelty, will condemn you for having an emotion, or having a thought, or having a memory, or having a fantasy. When Jesus Christ said, "You have read that to commit adultery is a sin, but I say unto you, anyone who has committed adultery in their heart has committed sin." In the greater context of the Gospels of the Christ, the point was just that the need for grace, and that grace is apparent. That's all. He was telling people who were already religious that some of their assumptions were faulty. The sin of the Pharisees was not a lack of faith, but an excess of faith. Faith so rigid it couldn't adapt to more information. A fanatic is rigid and cannot adapt. A true scientist is always open to new, peer-reviewed data, and is always happy, no less enthusiastic, to update their worldview based on such data. In the context of Sermon on the Mount, the indictment of adultery within one's heart within the context of the God that you worship is already loving and is already knowledgeable and already has your back. The inference is, we've just moved the goalposts, but you're safe. You're safe. So let's step out of Christendom and back into Buddhism. Yes, some emotions are pleasurable and some emotions are painful, but they have no moral value. We are not indicted if we feel a painful emotion, or a painful fantasy, or a painful memory. We are not exonerated by a pleasurable memory, or a pleasurable fantasy, or a pleasurable emotion. So the question, my friends, is what are we going to do with the turmoil that we experience? The first step is, if you choose to meditate, is to adopt a resourceful posture. And I think I have it over now. I've got it over yonder. So a great posture, and I'm going to change buttons for a moment and click button 9. A great posture is displayed in this ancient style Buddha statue. The earliest Buddha statues did not depict the Buddha sitting in a full lotus position, but what some would call a quarter lotus position, with the shins stacked in a quasi-parallel position with zero strain on the knees and the hips opened deliberately, with the chin subtly tucked and a traction created internally between the skull and the hips. This is a resourceful posture, both physically and because the physical houses the brain and the brain houses the mind, this also helps the mind as well. Mentally, our job is not to indulge the negativity we're experiencing, nor is it to repress, justify, minimize, or rationalize what we're experiencing. What then is our job? Our job is to notice what we're experiencing and to release what we're experiencing. And that sounds just Jim dandy, but how do we do it? Fortunately, through the wonders of evolution, virtually every healthy vertebrate life form on this planet has an autonomic nervous system, which can be divided functionally in half. There's a sympathetic aspect and a parasympathetic aspect. Every time we breathe in, we automatically engage our sympathetic nervous system, which is wired not for active concentration, but instead to merely notice, and to do so vulnerably, passively, viscerally, and randomly. As we breathe in, we do what we're wired to do, and that is simply experience our perceptions. Our perceptions of sights, sounds, sensations, flavors, scents, and the like. Including perception, including our abilities to emote, intend, reason, recall, and imagine. We notice that. We could notice the external, the internal, the physical, the mental, the pleasurable, the painful, the interesting, the boring, the glorious, and the grotesque. What do we do with that which we notice? We breathe out, and every time we breathe out, we wind up engaging our parasympathetic nervous system. And that is wired in such a way as to support mental release and physical relaxation. And the cool thing is, because it is already wired, we do not need to force it. We play with the Buddha's 12 meditations and 4 contemplations not to impress ideas upon the central nervous system, but to help us to metaphorically get out of our own way. It is as if you and I were getting ready to sprint, and we had our feet in the runner's blocks, and our coach noticed that we had tied our shoes together. The coach comes over, pats us on the shoulder for a moment, whispers something in our ear, and unties our shoes and extricates our shoes from each other, thus preventing us from getting in our own way, from undermining our own physiological processes. So by reminding ourselves that we are permitted to notice even uncomfortable things as we breathe in, and that we are permitted to relax as we breathe out, we are getting out of our own way. Way back in the 90s, our computers had metal hard drives as opposed to the glass hard drives many computers have now. Back in the 90s, our computers were designed to do a defragmentation program where It was kind of like cleaning house and reorganizing our hard drives. That is exactly what happens when we use the Buddha's methods of mindfulness, meditation, and contemplation. As a benefit of this, not only are we more peaceful, not only are we more resourceful, not only are we more joyful, not only are we more loving, but, and I want to explore this a bit further, so I'm going to hit button 7 here. As a result of using these innate processes in our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, the activity in our underbrain, the activity in our amygdala diminishes. And the electrical activity in our anterior cingulate gyrus, the electrical activity of our seat of empathy increases. And so without contemplating empathy, by simply healing turmoil and increasing peace, we automatically access our empathy as if empathy was our metaphoric birthright, as if it was our standard operating procedure. There's a third category of benefits to be had from successfully implementing the Buddha's mindfulness meditations and contemplations. And that would be that we are liberated from the two extremes of either being completely rigid and buttoned down or completely scattered. And instead of becoming a slave to scattered spontaneity, we are empowered by centered spontaneity that is rooted in love. So this loving, centered spontaneity, and truly empowers our capacities to choose, communicate, and act. When our actions, communication, and choices flow from love-centered spontaneity, then truly we become the people that our dogs already think we are. I would very much like to lead you this morning on the Buddha's 12 meditations and 4 contemplations. And I shall do that after less than 2 minutes of housekeeping. This is Lama Jigme Gyatso of the Buddha Joy Meditation School. Welcome to Meditate Like a Jedi, which is brought to you by viewers just like you who help support this channel on Patreon. If you love Star Wars and you wish to meditate as transformatively as Rey on Ahch-To under the guidance of Luke Skywalker, be sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. Good news! If at any point during this early morning live stream you have a specific question about Buddhist meditation, Buddhist philosophy, or how to apply them to your life, simply type your question in great detail in the chat window on the right-hand side of the screen. And now we come to our formal practice text, or sadhana, if you're fancy. Just as every sprint begins with a starter's pistol and ends with the crossing of a finish line, I found that most of my students take comfort in ending every meditation session with a short chant of empathy and wisdom, and beginning every meditation with a short chant of empathy and enthusiasm. Non-superstitious, of course. So we're going to chant these words to guide our intention and exercise or more empowering neural pathways. Please chant with me. May I liberate all beings from the tyranny of hating, craving, and clinging by relying on the Buddha's example, instructions, and students. May I liberate all beings from the tyranny of hating, craving, and clinging by relying on the Buddha's example, instructions, and students. So this isn't a prayer, this is a statement of intention, because we use words to guide intention, which guides thoughts, which guides energy, which guides the phenomena in our life. May I liberate all beings from the tyranny of hating, craving, and clinging by relying on the Buddha's example, instructions, and students. So when we add the Buddha's 12 meditations with his 4 contemplations, we get the number 16, which divides evenly into 4 groups of 4. We begin with Kaya Sati's only set of 4 preliminary meditations that center our bodies. Kaya means body in Pali, and Sati means mindfulness. Mystery solved. We begin with our first of Centering's 4 physical preliminary practices, where we mindfully notice and even investigate our relaxingly longer, gentle exhalations. So investigation is simply the opposite of defensiveness. We can notice pleasurable things, we can notice painful things, comfortable things and uncomfortable things. Whatever we notice, we choose not to recoil from. We are already wired to relax during each exhalation. So this mindfulness is our first enlightenment factor. Investigation is the second of 7 enlightenment factors. And relaxation is the 5th. Our tranquility is the 5th of the 7 enlightenment factors. The Buddha's path to enlightenment is paved with inhalation, exhalation, the 4 bases of mindfulness, and these 7 enlightenment factors. We're going to play with 2 rhetorical questions. The first rhetorical question is only 2 words long. As we breathe in, we can silently and mentally recite how. As we exhale, we can silently and mentally recite long. Our job is not to, in a contrived manner, choose how long or short or deep or shallow to breathe. Our job is not even to actively investigate. All we're doing is passively reciting these 2 words, silently and mentally, in harmony with our natural inhalation, exhalation, and relaxation. And the great irony is this super simple, easy process is powerful. But do not take my word for it. Put it to the test in the metaphoric laboratory of your own body and mind by practicing along with me right now. We are wired in such a way that as we recite these words silently and mentally, we will notice other things. We will notice other sights, sounds, sensations, flavors, scents, and the like. We could notice emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings. This is not an indictment. Sometimes these words that we silently and mentally recite will be in the foreground, while our perceptions will be in the background. Sometimes it's the other way around. That's okay. Play with these exercises. Let your body and mind do what they do. This is my adaptation of the Buddha's most popular meditation manual, known in Pali as the Anapanasati Sutta. There are many versions of this discourse in the corpus or of Pali literature, which makes sense. He probably gave this talk many times. My favorite version begins with a series of numbers. 2 phases of breath, 4 bases of mindfulness, 7 enlightenment factors, resulting in the 2 benefits of the true knowledge of mindfulness and the liberation of meditation. So the Buddhist promises that when we practice this correctly and enthusiastically and consistently, we will master knowledge and liberation, which is pretty cool. Mastering the path does not mean we stop feeling certain things. It means we've gotten so good at practicing the Buddha's techniques that we now, by the way, practicing the techniques is walking the path of liberation. Mastering the techniques to the point of practicing them spontaneously, habitually, easily, and effectively, is enlightenment, is mastery. For instance, we have become enlightened as to how to eat an apple, or enlightened as to ride a motorcycle, or enlightened as to how to tie a shoe. That's all it is. It's just mastery. Abraham Maslow is famous for teaching his hierarchy of needs, but he also taught a 4-step path to mastery. We begin with ignorance of ignorance, then awareness of ignorance, then awareness of knowledge, awareness of expertise, and then ignorance of expertise. So in other words, the Chinese used to say, at first I didn't know what a punch was. Then I knew what a punch was, but I didn't know how to punch. Then when I studied how to punch, a punch was everything. And once I mastered a punch was nothing. In other words, you're able to punch spontaneously, habitually, easily, and effectively. One of the many nicknames for enlightenment is ordinary mind or nothing special. That can be explained both in psychology and in philosophy as the Dunning-Kruger effect, whereby a fool thinks himself an expert in the areas where he's ignorant, and the wise think themselves ignorant in their areas where they are experts. This is also further elaborated in the cognitive bias known as the burden of knowledge, where once someone becomes truly acclimated to expertise, they forget that there's something special about it, that they've invested effort and time to master this expertise, and they begin to feel like what their area of expertise is common knowledge. That's why so many times benign teachers will sometimes talk over their students' heads, not because they're trying to intimidate their students, because they've forgotten their students know a little bit less than them. We come now to the second of Centering's 4 physical preliminary practices, where we mindfully notice the first enlightenment factor and even investigate the second enlightenment factor, the coalescence, the sixth enlightenment factor, of our invigorating, the third enlightenment factor, sharper inhalation. So let's try that again. Where we mindfully notice and even investigate the coalescence of our invigoratingly sharper inhalations. We don't force it. We breathe naturally. We allow our medulla oblongata and our cerebellum to decide how long, short, deep, or shallow to breathe. All we do is silently and mentally recite how and short in harmony with our inhalation, exhalation, and relaxation. Sometimes people will say to me, many commentaries explain that this is subtly invigorating, and they're correct. So some people would say that if you feel drowsy, you could apply this antidote. And the answer is you could. Or you may wish to respect the wisdom of your body. If our body sends us a signal to go rest, we probably should listen to that signal. In my experience, if we fall asleep during meditations, because A, our lifestyle needs are not being met, food, shelter, clothing, sleep, that kind of stuff, or we're not eating a diet that is optimized for our body, or perhaps we're using words when we're meditating that have an overly sedating effect. So over the years, over the decades, I've made subtle adjustments to this text to optimize the words for English speakers so that it would maximize the empowerment. But sometimes we just need to respect our body's ever-changing needs. It's been my experience that if we try to muscle through, we'll do more harm than good. But when we respect our body's needs, we empower our body to get better and better and better at doing the tasks that we desire, such as meditating. So I do not think that we should fight our fatigue. We should use our fatigue as a signal to tell us it's time to explore the variables of our life, including our diet, our sleep hygiene, our word choices. And when all else fails, go rest. Take a lesson from the dog. Curl up, take a rest. Because when you wake up, you'll yawn and stretch and do some metaphoric version of zoomies. We come to the third of centerings for physical preliminary practices where we mindfully notice and even investigate our bodies. As we breathe in, we could silently, for the first time in this morning's practice, we will silently and mentally recite the sensory verb, feel, which is the opposite of just zoning out. And as we exhale, we silently and mentally recite the noun, form, which functions as a synonym for a body. Remember, we're not forcing perception. We are already wired to feel, to perceive during our inhalation. All we're doing with our verb choice is aligning our intention with our factory installed programming. So that we lessen the amount of resistance we experience between our ears. We come to the fourth of centerings for physical preliminary practices, where we allow our bodies to tranquilly relax. Remember, we don't have to force it. We are already wired to relax during each exhalation. As we breathe in, we silently and mentally recite the noun, form, which refers to our body. And as we exhale, we silently and mentally recite the verb calm, which basically is we are already embracing the mechanism that is already present. Instead of resisting it, we are getting out of our own way. We're not repressing, we are allowing. These exercises are perfectly appropriate the next time you practice tantric sex. During the majority of the session, you can silently and mentally recite on feel form. And as you feel yourself approaching orgasm, you might explore form calm. That will prolong the act. Because our job is neither to repress orgasm nor chase orgasm, but to find a way to notice the sensations and process them in a way that increases our mindfulness and wisdom and love. In tantric circles, the archetypical position is yabyum. And that's lovely. But it has been my experience that any sexual favor, given or received, can be brought into the path of Tantra. We continue with Vedana Satis, set of 4 jhana meditations that center our feelings. So we've gone from body to feelings. And you'll find that feelings are kind of like the overlapping Venn diagram between body and subtle mind. We begin with the first of 4 feeling-oriented centering practices that empower us to savor the first jhana's blissful joy. And now I'm going to pause for a second to remind you that joy is the 4th enlightenment factor. Now, this blissful joy flows from, ironically enough, gently grinning with the corners of our mouth, the apples of our cheeks, and the crow's feet of our eyes. And we're grinning towards our bodies of flesh, blood, and bone. This is a natural thing. How many adults on their way to the shower pass by the mirror and investigate themselves? Sadly, it's typically children who will grin at their reflection. Adults are typically full of self-loathing. But the good news is, if we eat the foods that we have evolved to eat, I'm looking at you, whole food vegan diet, and we eat them during the times of day that we evolved to do so. We have a healthy, sustainable workout program. Very, very soon we can return to contentment, acceptance and contentment, and even delight in the reflection we see staring back at us. As we breathe in, let's silently and mentally recite the verb grin. We'll be playing with the verb grin 3 times during these 16 exercises. During the exhalation, let's silently and mentally recite the noun form. Now, this doesn't have to be a scary, Krusty the Clown sort of a grin. If all you do is silently and mentally recite these words in harmony with our inhalation and exhalation and relaxation, then the subconscious processes of the 3-pound supercomputer between your ears will do the heavy lifting for you. One of the many litmus tests of our meditative practice and its transformative effect upon our lives is shifting from actively going through life to passively flowing through life. For instead of, there was a wonderful, wonderful series called Altered Carbon, and there was a phrase, we accept what is offered, which is different than we make demands. Going through life from a place of centered spontaneity, we can shed the exhausting habit of making things happen and allow our choices, utterances, and deeds to flow from a place of centered spontaneity. That's the most efficient way to turn our wishing love into acting love. We come to the second of 4 feeling-oriented centering practices where we savor the second jhana's peaceful joy that flows from, once again, gently grinning, but this time, gently grinning again with the corners of our mouth, the apples of our cheeks, and the crow's feet of our eyes, but this time towards our thoughts, emoting, intending, reasoning, recalling, and imagining. So we've gone from the very coarse form to the less coarse thoughts. And of course, we're using thoughts as an umbrella term, are we not? So as we breathe in, we continue to silently and mentally recite the verb grin. But this time as we exhale, we're going to silently and mentally recite the noun thoughts. This is a wonderful exercise to make peace with our emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings, to transition from living in resistance to living in acceptance. Now, acceptance doesn't mean we are a slave to every impulse, but it means we flow with our impulse the way perhaps Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers might have danced across the ballroom floor, as opposed to 2 drunks fighting in an alley behind a bar. We come to the third of four feeling-oriented centering practices, where we savor the third jhana's contentment. By mindfully noticing, investigating, and coalescing our thoughts, emoting, intending, reasoning, recalling, and imagining. As we breathe in, we silently and mentally recite the verb, feel, and as we exhale, we silently and mentally recite the noun, thoughts. Now this seems like a sibling of this exercise, feel, form, and it is. Feel thoughts. we come to the fourth of four feeling-oriented centering practices where we savor the fourth jhana's neutrality by allowing our thoughts, emoting, intending, reasoning, recalling, and imagining to tranquilly relax. As we breathe in, we silently and mentally recite the umbrella term thoughts. And as we exhale, we silently and mentally recite the verb calm, remembering that we're not forcing this. We are allowing this, for we are already wired by evolution to relax during each exhalation. We're just choosing to get out of our own way. And yes, this is very similar to this exercise. So we're not controlling anything. We're not trying to control anything. We are simply allowing our bodies and natural mechanisms to do what they have already evolved to do. We are actively allowing. If young Anakin Skywalker had been taught this, it probably would have prevented the rise of Darth Vader. Consider the duel between Darth Maul and Qui-Gon Jinn. Remember when they were separated by force fields? Darth Maul actively paced impatiently, while Qui-Gon Jinn patiently sat in meditation. Now you might say, but Qui-Gon lost. But did he? His physical body was defeated, for it was much, much older than Darth Maul's. But the Clone Wars television series and the Rebels television series revealed the sad, tragic fate of Darth Maul, from defeat to defeat, from obsession to madness. Whereas Qui-Gon Jinn went on to continue Yoda's training and continue Obi-Wan Kenobi's training and contribute to indirectly to Luke Skywalker's training and the defeat of the Empire. So yes, this is the path of allowing. And there's more power. And to paraphrase our friend Obi-Wan Kenobi before his death, more power than you can imagine. We continue with Chitta Sati's second set of 4 jhana meditations, this time that center our mind. So we've gone from centering our body to centering our feelings to centering our mind. Now you might ask, well, what then is the difference between thoughts and mind? We begin with the first of 4 mind-oriented centering practices where we savor the 5th jhana sphere of infinite spaciousness. By mindfully noticing, investigating, and coalescing our mind's ability to see, hear, feel, taste, smell, and the like. So you can see how this is more ancient and more subtle and more fundamental than thoughts, emotions, intentions, reasoning, recollections, and imaginings. One is not superior, they're just different. Both are necessary. Minds, sights, perceptions of sights, sounds, sensations, flavors, scents, and the like is much more ancient. So we're going into the lower basement of our mind. Again, as we breathe in, we silently and mentally recite the verb feel. And this time as we exhale, we silently and mentally recite the noun mind. If you've just joined me, buenos dias. If you have any specific questions about Buddhist meditation, Buddhist philosophy, or their application, simply type your question in great detail in the chat window on the right-hand side of the screen. We come now to the second of 4 mind-oriented centering practices where we savor the 6th jhana sphere of infinite awareness, which we generate by allowing our mind to gladden us towards it. We gently smile once again from the corners of our mouth, the apples of our cheeks, and the crow's feet of our eyes. As we breathe in, we could silently and mentally recite the verb grin, and as we exhale, we could silently and mentally recite the noun mind. And if this seems somewhat familiar to this previous exercise, there's probably a good reason for that. We come to the third of 4 mind-oriented centering practices where we savor the 7th jhana sphere of non-graspability, where we allow our minds seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, smelling, and the like to tranquilly relax in the most sustainable way. We silently, and during the inhalation, we silently and mentally recite the noun mind. And as we exhale, we silently and mentally recite the verb calm. Remember, we are not forcing our mind to calm. We are already, every exhalation, thanks to our parasympathetic nervous system, is already wired for relaxation. We're merely using these words to align our intention with our factory-installed programming. We come to the fourth of 4 mind-oriented centering practices where we savor the 8th jhana sphere of acquiescent non-labeling by experiencing the liberating equanimity of our controlling tendencies to push and to pull. As we breathe in, we continue to recite the noun mind. But this time, as we exhale, we silently and mentally recite the verb free. We're not forcing this, we are merely allowing this. We end with Dhammasati, also known as Anika Vipassanas, a set of 4 impermanence contemplations to help us circumstantially let go. And now we get to use rhetorical questions to really play with our prefrontal cortex, but in a gentle, sustainable manner. We come to the first of 4 contemplations where we consider course impermanence with the rhetorical question. As we breathe in, we silently and mentally recite what? And as we exhale, we silently and mentally recite change, remembering that this question is rhetorical. Of course, if I was a silly man, I would construct a rhetorical question about a rhetorical question, asking, surely we all know what a rhetorical question is, don't we? Hello, Department of Redundancy Department. We come to the second of four contemplations where we consider subtle impermanence with the words what? Fade. We come to the third of four contemplations where we consider very subtle impermanence with the question, what cease? We come to the final contemplation of this morning's practice, where we consider relinquishing, surrendering, and letting go. We do so with the question, how yield? A delightful way to exercise the second fold of the Eightfold Path is to chant the four immeasurables. And I should say also exercise or train in the first fold of the Eightfold Path as well. May everyone be free from misery, may everyone be happy. May no one be separated from the happiness. May everyone have balance from the tyranny of hate and craving and clinging freed. If you feel that I have earned it, you could type something in the chat window. You could give this live stream a thumbs up. You could share it with a friend. You could even help support this channel on Patreon. In approximately 2¼ hours, I would very much like to return to lead today's mid-morning lesson and meditation. Until then, may you and yours be happy and healthy. And if you are as geeky as me, this is the way.